The men inside the Pendleton County Livestock and Equipment Auction House were not there for a dog. They were there because the county sheriff's office had finally done what everyone knew was coming, cut the K9 unit to 3 animals and offloaded the rest. Budget meetings, liability concerns, a new county commissioner who thought patrol dogs were a luxury. The paperwork had been signed in March. By June, the animals were property of the state, which meant they could be sold. The auction house smelled like motor oil and old concrete. Folding chairs were arranged in uneven rows across the floor. Ceiling fans turned slowly overhead, doing nothing useful about the heat. Along the far wall, behind a chain-link partition that had been dragged in for the occasion, 4 dogs waited in temporary kennels, stacked too high. 3 of them paced. The 4th sat perfectly still and watched the room with yellow eyes that didn't blink. He was the one they called Volt. His real designation was K914, Malinois, male, 7 years old, service record spanning 4 deployments with the Naval Special Warfare Support Activity Unit stationed out of Virginia Beach. He had been loaned to the county's tactical response team 2 years ago, after his primary handler was medically separated from active duty. The handler's name was Chief Petty Officer Dale Whitmore, but that name was already taken, so the man who brought Volt into service had a different one in this story. His name was Senior Chief Petty Officer Grant Holloway, and he had been dead for 14 months. Nobody at the auction knew that when the girl walked in. She came through the side entrance, the one that was supposed to be for staff only, because the main doors had a line and she didn't want to wait. She was 23 years old, 5'4", wearing a grey canvas jacket 2 sizes too large for her frame. Her name was Nell Holloway. She carried a manila envelope under one arm and a cashier's check in the inside pocket of that jacket. The jacket that had been her father's, that still had his name tape sewn over the left breast pocket, that she had taken from his closet the morning of his funeral and had not returned since. She stood at the edge of the room and looked toward the back wall. Volt stopped watching the ceiling fans. He turned his head 45 degrees and looked directly at the door she had come through, even though she was standing still, even though she had not spoken, even though there were 43 other people in the room making noise. His nostrils moved. His ears came forward. He did not make a sound. The handler crouched beside his kennel noticed and tightened his grip on the latch without thinking about why. Nell didn't see any of that yet. She was looking at a man in a short-sleeved dress shirt, with a county lanyard around his neck, who was making his way toward her with an expression that people wear when they're deciding whether someone belongs in a room. His name was Bernard Caulfield, asset coordinator for the Pendleton County Sheriff's Office, and he had been managing this liquidation for 6 weeks. He had sold 4 retired K9s in that time. It was not work he was proud of, but someone had to do it, and the animals went to vetted buyers with documented facilities. It was legal. It was by the book. He told himself that most mornings. "Can I help you?" he said to Nell. "I'm here for lot 4, she said. He looked at her. She was young. The jacket was too big. She had a bruise fading yellow under her left eye that she hadn't covered with anything. "Lot 4 is Volt," he said. "He's a tactical working dog. Former SEAL support asset. He's not a house pet. I know what he is," Nell said. "I grew up watching him train." Bernard looked at the manila envelope. "Are you a credentialed buyer? We require documented proof of facility, and I have documentation," she said, and held out the envelope. He took it. Inside was a letter on Department of Defense letterhead, a certificate of relationship to a deceased service member, a copy of her father's service record, and a handwritten note from the kennel master at the NSWSA unit in Virginia Beach that read, in full, "Nell Holloway has my personal endorsement. If you have questions, call me directly." A phone number followed. Bernard read it twice, then he looked up at her. "You're Grant Holloway's daughter." "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Around them, people found their seats. Someone at the front table was testing a microphone that didn't need testing. The ceiling fans turned. Lot 4 is estimated at $12,000 to $18,000, Bernard said carefully. Tactical assets in his condition can go higher depending on interest. We have 3 registered bidders with documented security firm affiliations. Nell reached into the inside pocket of the jacket and produced the cashier's check. She held it so he could see the amount. It was for $9,000. It was everything she had in her savings account, plus $400 borrowed from her roommate, plus the $212 she'd found in a coffee can in the back of her father's closet after the funeral. Bernard looked at the check. He looked at her face. He looked at the jacket. "The bidding opens at market assessment," he said. "I can't guarantee." "I understand," Nell said. "I just need a seat." He gave her a seat. Grant Holloway had joined the Navy at 19, the same year Nell learned to ride a bike without training wheels. She remembered the morning he left for boot camp because he had made her pancakes first. Not the mix kind, the kind from scratch, where you had to separate the egg whites, and he had let her put in too much vanilla because she liked the smell. She remembered standing on the front porch of their house in Lynchburg, Virginia, watching his truck pull out of the driveway, and not understanding yet what it meant that he was going somewhere she couldn't follow. He came back. He always came back. That was the thing about her father. He came back from places that other men didn't come back from, and he was always the same when he returned. Same coffee, black, 2 cups before 7. Same way of standing in doorways like he was assessing the room. Same laugh, the one that started low and took a while to get going, like an engine on a cold morning. He brought Volt home for the first time when Nell was 17. Not home permanently. That wasn't allowed. But he brought him to the house one weekend when they were both on a training rotation through the area. And he let Nell sit in the backyard with the dog for an hour while he watched from the porch steps. Volt had been 3 years old. He was already enormous, already precise in the way that working dogs are precise, with none of the softness of a pet and all of the focus of something that had learned to pay very close attention to the world. He had sat beside Nell in the grass and let her put her hand on his back. He didn't lean into it. He didn't perform any kind of warmth. He simply permitted it and watched the fence line and occasionally glanced back at her father on the porch in a way that made Nell feel like she was being monitored by 2 separate security systems that happened to trust each other completely. "He likes you," her father had said from the porch. "He's tolerating me," Nell said. "For Volt. That's the same thing." After that, she asked about him the way other kids ask about cousins who live far away. Her father gave her updates at the margins of phone calls. "We ran a maritime boarding exercise. Volt was clean, 12 seconds faster than last time. He cleared a structure in 40 seconds flat. They had to reset the drill because nobody could believe it. He found the thing they hid in the engine compartment. He always finds the thing." She had never met a dog who felt less like a dog and more like a colleague. When her father was diagnosed in the fall of his 51st year. Not in the field, not on a mission, but in a routine physical that found something growing in a place it had no business being. She flew to Virginia Beach and sat in his kitchen and listened to him explain it the way he explained everything, which was calmly and in order. He talked about the prognosis first, then treatment options, then logistics. He had made a list. "What happens to Volt?" she asked. He looked at her across the table. "I've got 2 more years before mandatory medical separation," he said. "We'll see where things stand." "But if you will see where things stand," he said again. He lasted 14 months. The cancer was faster than the prognosis. He died in January in a bed in the Naval Medical Center, Portsmouth, with Nell on one side and his commanding officer on the other side and a window that let in the grey light of a Virginia morning. He did not die afraid. He died the way he lived, which was without excess, without complaint, and with his hands folded on his chest as though he was simply waiting for the next thing. Nell was 22 years old. She drove back to Lynchburg. She packed up the house with her father's sister, who flew in from Phoenix and handled logistics the way the Holloway family always handled logistics, which was efficiently and without talking about feelings. Nell found the coffee can. She found the jacket. She found, in a drawer in his desk, a photograph of Volt that someone had taken during a training exercise. The dog mid-air, clearing a 6-foot barrier, ears flat, expression utterly focused, the handler's arm raised in command, just visible at the edge of the frame. She put the photograph in the jacket pocket. She put the jacket on. She started making calls. The thing nobody tells you about a military working dog being retired is how fast it happens. 1 week a dog is an active asset. The next week a form is filed. The week after that the dog is property. The unit had done everything they were supposed to do. They had listed Volt for adoption first through the official DoD adoption program, and the list of interested parties had been reviewed, and decisions had been made. But Volt was 7 years old and had a file that included the words elevated reactivity in unstructured environments and requires handler continuity, and that combination of factors made the pool of eligible adopters very small very fast. The county tactical team had taken him on a 2-year temporary basis. That arrangement had ended when the K9 unit was cut, and now Volt was here, in a temporary kennel in the Pendleton County Livestock and Equipment Auction House, in a cage that was too small for him, in a room that smelled like strangers. Nell had spent 4 months navigating the paperwork to get herself on the eligible bidder list. She had a letter from a licensed dog trainer she'd met through a veterans support group. She had the facility documentation for the fenced property her aunt had signed over to her. 2 acres outside Lynchburg, her father's land, where Nell was living now in the house she'd grown up in. She had the DoD letter. She had the kennel master's note. What she did not have was enough money. She knew that going in. She had made the calculation 3 different ways, and it always came out the same. She was short, potentially, by a lot, depending on who else showed up with a checkbook. The security firm buyers were the ones she was worried about. She had done research. One of them, a private protection company based out of Charlotte, had already acquired 2 retired military working dogs in the past 18 months. Their website featured those dogs in photographs, posed, muzzled, positioned in front of a logo. She knew what that meant for an animal like Volt. She knew what her father would have thought of it. She had come anyway, because what else do you do? The auction opened at 10 in the morning. The first 3 lots went fast. 2 standard patrol dogs, healthy, younger, uncontroversial. The security firm buyer got one of them without much competition. The second went to a training facility in West Virginia that had sent a representative with a 3-ring binder of documentation and quiet confidence. Then Bernard Caulfield walked to the front of the room and said, Lot 4, K914, designated Volt, male Belgian Malinois, age 7, former Naval Special Warfare Support asset, 4-year active service record, 2-year county tactical assignment. Starting bid is $10,000. He paused. I'll note for interested parties that this animal has an elevated handling designation. He requires an experienced handler and a structured environment. He is not suitable for general domestic placement. Nell was in the 4th row. She had her paddle number resting on her knee. The Charlotte security firm opened at $10,000. A second bidder, someone she didn't recognize, a man in a polo shirt with a Bluetooth earpiece, countered at 11. The firm went to 12. Nell raised her paddle at $12,500. The room shifted slightly. Someone turned to look at her. The Charlotte firm representative, a woman in a blazer with the company logo on the lapel, glanced over her shoulder, assessed Nell in approximately 2 seconds, and went to $13,000. Polo shirt dropped out. Nell went to $13,500. Charlotte went to $14,000. Nell's check was for $9,000. She had raised her paddle 3 times on money she did not have, on the theory that sometimes the thing standing between you and a no is the willingness to look like you have more than you do. Her hands were steady. She did not know where that came from. She suspected it was the jacket. At 14,000, she lowered her paddle. Bernard was watching her from the front. The Charlotte representative was filling out a form. And then something happened that Bernard Caulfield would describe later to his wife over dinner in a voice that was quieter than his usual voice. Volt, who had been sitting silent and still in his kennel against the back wall, turned his head toward the fourth row. He turned it at the exact moment that Nell lowered her paddle. Not before, not after. At the moment her arm came down, he had not made a sound during the entire auction. He had not responded to the auctioneer's voice, or the murmur of the crowd, or the other dogs shifting in their kennels nearby. He had sat like something carved from the same material as the concrete floor, yellow eyes moving methodically around the room, the way a soldier holds a perimeter. But he turned his head when her arm came down. The handler crouched near his kennel, a young deputy named Serrano, who had been assigned to manage the animals during the sale, and who had never worked with Volt before, and who had spent the morning maintaining what he privately considered a respectful distance, noticed the movement and went very still himself. Nell was staring at the floor. The Charlotte representative finished her form and looked up. "Are there any further bids?" Bernard said, and Nell Holloway stood up. The room went quieter than it had been all morning. She was 23 years old. She was wearing her dead father's jacket. She walked from the fourth row to the front of the room, and she did not look at the Charlotte representative. And she did not look at Bernard, and she looked at the man standing behind the auctioneer's table, who was not Bernard, who was the actual county asset director, a man in his 60s named Ferris, who had been standing in the back corner all morning with his arms folded. "Sir," she said. Ferris unfolded his arms. "That dog spent 4 years supporting naval special warfare operations," she said. "His handler was my father, Senior Chief Petty Officer Grant Holloway, who died 14 months ago. I have documentation of relationship, documentation of facility, a personal endorsement from the unit kennel master, and a cashier's check. I am short by $5,000, she said it plainly. No performance, no apology. Just the fact of it, laid out in order, the way her father had taught her to present a situation. The room was very quiet. "What I'm asking," she said, "is whether this county is willing to sell a combat veteran to a private security firm's branding operation, or whether there is another option." Ferris looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the Charlotte representative. He looked at Bernard. The Charlotte representative said carefully, "We are a licensed acquiring entity with documented." "I know what you are," Ferris said, not unkindly, just plainly. He was quiet for a few seconds. Then he said, "Bernard, what's our position on adjusted transfer value for service member family acquisition of former partner animals?" Bernard looked at his clipboard. "There's discretionary authority in Section 4 of the liquidation protocol. It's never been used. Today it gets used," Ferris said. The paperwork took 40 minutes. Nell sat in a folding chair near the side door and filled out forms and signed things and did not cry, which she had promised herself she would not do in this building. Her hands were still steady. She could not figure out that part out. When the last form was signed, Bernard walked her to the back partition. Deputy Serrano was crouched near Volt's kennel. He looked up when they approached and said, with genuine feeling, "He's been different since you sat down. I don't know how else to describe it." Nell looked at the kennel. Volt was standing now, not pacing, just standing with his weight forward and his ears up. Looking at her, the yellow eyes were the same as they'd always been, calm and total in their attention, measuring everything. She crouched down to his eye level. "Hey," she said quietly. He pushed his nose against the chain link. She reached into the pocket of the jacket, her father's jacket, and took out the photograph. She didn't know why. She just did it. She held it near the kennel, and she said, in a voice no louder than a conversation, the words her father used when they ended a training run. The release word, the one that meant finished, safe, come in. Her father had told it to her once, sitting on the porch on a Sunday afternoon, and she had memorized it the way she memorized things she wanted to keep. She said it now. Volt sat, not in the alert sit of a working dog, in the full, settled, weight-back sit of an animal that has heard the word it has been waiting for. Deputy Serrano exhaled. Bernard Caulfield, who had sold 4 retired canines and had not felt particularly good about any of them, pressed his mouth flat and looked at the ceiling. Nell unlatched the kennel door. Volt stepped out onto the concrete floor and stood beside her and put his nose to her hand and held it there, not in performance, not in greeting, but in the way that working dogs acknowledge a transition. One handler gone. One in front of him now, the world reorganized around this fact. She put her hand on his head. He was heavier than she expected. Denser. Real in a way that objects are real when you've only known them in photographs. "Okay," she said. "Okay, let's go home." The drive from Pendleton County back to Lynchburg was 2 hours and 40 minutes, mostly highway. Volt rode in the back seat. Nell had borrowed a harness attachment from Deputy Serrano, who had given it to her along with his personal cell number in case she needed anything, and who had shaken her hand twice. She drove the first hour without music. The second hour she put on the radio, country station low. Volt shifted once in the back seat, and then settled with his chin on his front paws and looked out the window at the passing trees. She thought about her father. She thought about him in the way she'd gotten used to. Not the long, drowning grief of the first months, but the smaller, constant thing that it became. The shape of him in the kitchen, making coffee. The particular way he held a phone, slightly too far from his ear because he'd always worn ear protection and had lost a little on the left side. The pancakes. She thought about the photograph in her pocket and the release word she had said and the way Volt had sat down. She had not planned to use the word. She had planned to bring documentation and a cashier's check and make her case. And if that wasn't enough, it wasn't enough. She had not planned the photograph either. Some things you do because they're the right thing to do, and you don't know they're the right thing until you're doing them. When she pulled into the driveway of the house in Lynchburg, it was late afternoon. The property was quiet. There were 2 acres of fenced land behind the house that she hadn't used for anything yet. She'd had the fence inspected in April. She had planted grass in the bald patches in May. She had done these things in the way you do things when you are building towards something you're not sure you'll get. She opened the back door. Volt stepped down from the car and stood in the driveway and looked at the house and then at the yard and then at the tree line at the back of the property. His ears moved in sequence, cataloging. She had watched her father do that same thing, standing in the doorway of a new space, reading the room before entering it. She walked to the backyard gate and unlatched it and held it open. Volt walked through. He made one complete circuit of the fence line, methodical, unhurried. He was not distressed. He was doing what he knew how to do, which was assess the perimeter, identify the parameters of his environment, establish what was safe and what required attention. He had done this in forward operating bases and in shipyards and in 3 foreign countries whose names were not in his official record. He did it now in her backyard in Lynchburg, Virginia, in the late afternoon light, with the grass her father had planted years ago under his paws. When he finished, he came back to where Nell was standing near the gate. He sat down beside her, not in front of her, not behind her, beside her, slightly to her left, in the position her father had described once as the working position. The dog where the handler's weak side is, where the handler can't see without turning, where coverage is needed most. It was not trained behavior in this context. There was no command for it. He simply sat down in the right place. The sky over the tree line was going orange and then pink, and then the color that doesn't have a good name, the one that comes just before dark. Nell stood at the fence and felt the weight of the dog beside her, the warmth of him, and did not say anything. There was nothing that needed saying. She had come with $9,000 and her father's jacket and a release word memorized from a Sunday porch conversation. She had come home with the last thing her father had trusted completely. Volt was not looking for Grant Holloway anymore. He had made the calculation that working dogs make. The handler is gone. The mission continues. The person beside me is the person beside me now. He would grieve in the way dogs grieve, which is without language and without ceremony and without end, the absence always present, worked around rather than resolved. But he was not pacing the fence line. He was not assessing threats. He was sitting in the right place, beside the right person, in a yard that smelled like the man he had followed into 4 deployments and out the other side. And the evening was quiet, and there was grass under his paws, and he was exactly where he was supposed to be.